right. I guess we will get started because it's 101. So thanks for jumping on. We're going to talk about this offer that I sent over to you guys on Pumble. Um, so hopefully everybody had a chance to read through this scenario. We'll kind of go through it a little bit right now. So the subject property is in South Milwaukee. If you pull up the listing, if you didn't get a chance to, it's on just hit the market on sale for $300,000. It's 4 bedroom, 2 bath, 1,800 square feet, 1960s build. This is really like one of those homes that are going to be perfect for your first-time home buyers. So definitely like something that would be attractive to that buyer group. There are some comments here that we should probably read through before we go see the property. If you notice that they use the word like lots of potential or a little TLC or personal touch and updates, right? So I think that just speaks to the fact that, it's a 1960s house. There probably wasn't a major renovation ever done on it. There might be some things that are original to the property, or, maybe it really hasn't been touched since 1985, right? So there's going to be some things that the buyer is going to have to do as far as work, whether that's just cosmetic or if something deeper is revealed. It does also say in private remarks that there's a 2-car garage, offers added value with a little TLC. And did that throw up a red flag for anybody?
A little bit, yeah.
Why? What was suspicious about it?
It just kind of makes it sound like it's needing a lot of work. Um, or like there are major issues with it.
Right. Yeah, that was kind of my feeling too. If we hadn't seen this house yet, my, question would be like, how much work is it going to be, right? Like, is it something that is even fixable? I've definitely seen garages where they probably should just be knocked down and rebuilt. There definitely see garages where you think they were in that kind of condition, and somebody comes in, they're like, "Oh no, we could easily fix this," and they do. So, is it surface level? Is it sideways? Is it like what's wrong with the garage, right? But that definitely is a little bit of a red flag. So it's good instincts that kind of set off your bells as well. The last thing on this details page that we should pay attention to is that it does say that we're going to need 48 hours for binding acceptance. Um, this could be a lot of different reasons. One, it could just be a marketing tactic. It could just be a tactic for them to try to gain as many offers without saying like, submit all your offers by Monday at 3 p.m., right? So they could just be trying to make it so somebody doesn't give them just an hour turnaround on binding acceptance, making sure that they can try to maybe get a few offers in. Most likely, when you see 48 hours, usually there's an attorney involved of some sort. I would say 9 times out of 10 when I see 48 hours binding acceptance, I think attorney review. Not that that really affects how you negotiate or affects how the seller is going to accept the offer. Um, it's just usually the seller is asking an attorney to read through it, just make sure that all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed and that it sounds like they're not being taken advantage of, which then leads me to believe that this home is in a trust or it's, some sort of family member maybe selling it. So my little, like what I do is I then go to the tax records. There's a lot of information you can get off of tax records before you go and look at a property. And the first thing I notice, what do you notice at the top of this tax record? What do you guys see right away?
That the owner lives in Arizona.
Yeah. So what makes like what kind of pops into your head when you see that? Like, okay, so the owner lives in Arizona and the house is in Milwaukee. What are there any like red flags or more questions that you have?
I would say I'm wondering if they've lived there. I didn't see if there was a condition report, but um yeah, if they've lived there, if it's an investment property, kind of how much time they've spent there and noticed things and all of that.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that is definitely what sets off my alarm bells too. So the fact that the seller needs 48 hours of binding acceptance, and it's totally a guess, right? Do I know that there's an attorney involved? No. Do I know that it's in a trust or a trustee's handling the sale? No, right? I'm just saying that there's kind of a couple of combinations here that you can start to put together to start to create a narrative of maybe what the seller might be looking for in an offer to really help you hone in on what's going to work for that seller. Does that make sense? So for me, they need 48 hours. The seller doesn't live in the state. Then the next thing I'm going to look at are the photos. I'll show you. We'll click through a few of them. What do you notice right away with this photo?
The floors are pretty beat up.
Yep. What else? Does anybody live there?
Doesn't look like it.
Right? If you go through these photos, it looks pretty vacant, right? There's no tables, no chairs, nothing I mean, there's barely window blinds, right? Okay, so the home is vacant. So for me, we start to kind of make some assumptions about the seller to help us with our offer. One, they don't have to move out 30 years worth of furniture and stuff out of the garage. Okay? That means they can maybe close quicker. That also probably means they might want to close quicker. Okay? Um, there's probably an attorney involved and a trust involved. Most likely, they're probably not going to want to do a whole lot of repairs. Doesn't say that they're not willing to do repairs, okay? And most sellers I've come across are very flexible on repairs that need to be done or compensation for those repairs. Only a few times in my world have I ever come across somebody completely hard-nosed that they won't do anything. Um, but I think that's also maybe a factor we should think about as well. Do we really think, I mean, if the sellers aren't even in town, are they going to really want to do repairs? So those are kind of some of the things that I start to think about and formulate in my mind. And then once we go see a property, then those are probably questions that I would bring to the listing agent before we wrote an offer, right? Why do you need the 48? Is there a specific reason you need the 48 hours? Is the seller, I see it's vacant. Does the seller want a quick close? Or do they want to hold it for a certain period of time? Is like those kinds of questions. Does that make sense? Your whole job when you're working with buyers or just real estate in general, your whole job is to really take small clues and piece them together into the best way to support your client. Okay. So let's switch over to the offer scenario a little bit and our buyer's profile. So we talked about how you already have a signed buyer agency agreement. There is 2.4% compensation that your buyer has agreed to pay you. They are first-time home buyers. Now, what are some assumptions you make about first-time home buyers?
They don't have too much experience on offers or how to deal with, like, what to look on in a
Yeah, they're really inexperienced. You're going to have to kind of handhold them, guide them, show them around the property, make sure that they're seeing even the small things that they might have to repair, things like that. What else comes to mind when you think of first-time home buyers?
The down payment might be lower.
Okay, which generally means what if they don't have as much money to bring for a down payment? like generally just in general, they don't have a lot of cash, right? Does that make sense? So they they have probably just enough scrapped together to get that down payment, maybe a little bit more to pay for the moving company, or a little bit more to actually like paint the interior. But the rest of the stuff is probably going to be things that they have to kind of save to be able to work on the repair. I know, like, for instance, in my own house, we had just enough money when we moved in to be able to redo the roof and gutters. And then like 3 years later, we saved enough to do the driveway. And then 3 years later, we saved enough to do the siding, right? So those large maintenance items are probably not all going to happen a month within them moving in, right? So we need to make sure that whatever house they buy, they're comfortable living in, even with some needed major repairs, because it's going to take them time to rebuild their savings to be able to then afford that. Make sense? So these first-time home buyers, because they're currently renting, they have to give their landlord a 30-day notice. They're also a little concerned about being homeless, obviously, right? So, they have their rents that, maybe their lease expires at the end of the year, so they're really trying to get somewhere. So that's something we need to just keep in the back of our minds. They're concerned about major items in the home, so the roof and the foundation, but they're not afraid to put in some sweat equity or tackle some minor repairs. Cash is tight, so they are using the FHA mortgage. What are the benefits of an FHA mortgage for first-time home buyers? Does anybody know?
Offer the gap coverage.
Say that again.
That offer gap coverage.
I don't know about gap coverage for the FHA mortgage, but why would a buyer be trying to use FHA versus conventional?
Don't they have lower down payments with it?
Yeah, that could be a big one. Most FHA mortgages are a 3.5% down payment. There are some conventional loans that can go down to 3%. Mostly though, you see those conventional loans start at 5%. So that is one benefit of FHA versus conventional. The other big thing with FHA is you can actually have a lower credit score. So FHA mortgages, they can usually go down to about a 580 credit score, whereas most conventional loans, they're going to want to see something at least 620. So because FHA is a government-backed loan, it allows people to tap into resources from the federal government in order to get that mortgage, versus a conventional loan is usually issued just by the bank. Okay. Overall, though, they really would prefer those principal and interest payments to be under $2,000, knowing that they're going to have to tack on homeowners insurance and their yearly property taxes. They feel like $2,000 is kind of where they want to be with that payment. They are pre-approved up to $350, and I put the current FHA rates from like Saturday in there. So hopefully that's close. All right. Does everybody feel like we have a good understanding of who our sellers are? We have a good understanding of what our buyers are going to need to win this house. Any questions so far or thoughts? Okay. So let's start writing this offer together. And I'm just gonna like sidebar real quick. The reason why offer practice is so important, everybody. It took me personally 4 hours to write my first offer. And now I can write one in like 20 minutes, right? You're gonna be out there doing business in really fast-paced environments if you haven't already experienced it. There was one time I was showing a house and he told me that final offers were due in 30 minutes from when my showing ended. And I was able to get home, write an offer, get it signed, and sent to the listing agent in that 30-minute window. So my question to you is, are you able to do that as well? Or are your buyers potentially going to lose out on a house because it's going to take you a while to write the offer? There's no time anymore in this market. So practice, practice, practice until you can almost do it with your eyes closed. Okay. So first things first, drafting it today. Agent of buyer, agent of seller, or agent of buyer and seller. What am I?
Agent of buyer.
Right. So I have a signed buyer agency agreement, which means I am the agent of the buyer. Oop, that's not what I want. Pretend I didn't do that. Okay. All right. So the buyer, what did I name them? Will buy it. Okay. Then the property is 1792 Poplar Avenue. And am I in the town, city, or village?
City.
Okay, do you guys know how to find that information? If you're not sure, come to the MLS, come to the tax information tab, and right over here on the right-hand side, it says taxed by City of South Milwaukee. Regardless of what the address of the property is, always use the taxed by field over here. Okay, you're gonna see that especially. Go ahead, sorry.
Are the buyers married? Because I know there were two, Bill, Will and Anita.
It doesn't really matter if they're married necessarily. If they both want to be if they're buying it together, they both want to be on the deed, then they should both be on the offer and sign it. Especially with first-time home buyers, a lot of those FHA loans are only for maybe one of the parties' income. So if, let's just say Will, is the only one getting the mortgage, then Will should be the only one on the offer. But if they are married, it's still a marital property state. So Anita would also be, has the rights to 50% of the property.
Thanks.
So I'm in the city, South Milwaukee, ooh, County of Milwaukee. Okay, guys, and how much are we going to offer? What'd you come up with?
I'll say 330, just in case there's like a lot of like renovations that they might need to do. I know he has like a 350 approval, and those like extra 20 might be put it into work for that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea. Definitely going under what their max is, right? Because there's some things that, you know, it is a first-time home buyer's house, and obviously it's not been renovated in a while. So maxing out their budget of 350 might be a little bit too much cash for them up front. And then they won't really have any money to do those repairs that are needed. So that's a smart idea. So 330. Anybody else think anything different?
I was thinking 320 or like 315 to 320. Just because it's still over, but they will be able to save a little bit more money for
Yeah.
repairs and stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I think both your instincts are right. I wrote down 315 personally. And that I don't think is enough to get the house. I think you're going to have to be at the 330 or higher mark. But 315, and we'll do the math when we get to the financing section. But if they really want to stay under 2,000 here, 315 puts them at 1988 or something like that. So if they're going to go up to 330, which I think is probably where you're going to need to be a little bit closer to win the house if you're in competition, you know, they're going to have to stretch that $2,000 payment, and they're going to have to be okay with that. So at the end of the day, the advice is probably something like, okay, you said you wanted payments at 2,000. Right now with this interest rate, we can lock you in at, it'll be 315 is what we would offer. We're in competition though. The agent said that there was already 4 other offers. I think honestly, you're gonna have to come up to win the house. So my question is, if you don't win the house at 315, how is that going to make you feel? And if you tell me that I don't want to spend a penny over 315, then that's fine. That's what we'll write. But if you tell me you're going to be heartbroken if you don't win it at 315, then I think we need to adjust that price. And you notice saying something like that, I'm not telling them what to offer, right? All I'm saying is I'm respecting your finances by keeping it at 315. You are approved to go up to 350, and I know that feels like a stretch. And I know that you're going to really have to think about those monthly payments. But here's what those monthly payments would look like at 330, which I think when I did the math, it was like $2,100 a month or something. Here's what those payments look like at 330. Does that feel like too big of a stretch for you? Is that an easy enough conversation, do you think, to have?
Yeah, I would say so.
Okay. So inclusions and exclusions, my best advice is always just to follow along with whatever they have in the MLS. But when you go to showings, have the MLS, either you have this pulled up on your phone or you're printing out with private remarks ahead of time and bringing it with you if you want. But I would be walking around and looking to see if there was any other potential inclusions or exclusions that I wanted to make sure I wrote into the contract. I think you're going to learn a lot through your journey that all realtors are human. And a lot of times they do miss things on the MLS. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what's in the MLS. At the end of the day, it only matters what is in that signed offer to purchase, right? So it's okay as a buyer's agent to do your due diligence on, are these the right inclusions? Are these the right exclusions? Okay. So buying acceptance, they asked for 48 hours. I'm going to go ahead and give them the 48 hours. I think it kind of, if I would maybe do like the 11th. I know it feels like 3 days, but it's not. And you can always put a time in here next to the date. So you can say 3 p.m., something like that, right? And if you wanted to really be accurate, I guess you could say Central Time, because the seller is in Arizona. So I guess let's be clear about whose 3 p.m. we're talking about. So don't be afraid to put timestamps into your binding acceptance as well. I also generally do that if I'm going to give them till the end of the day. I do 8 p.m. because I go to bed. I'm one of those people who likes to sleep. So please don't keep me up till midnight waiting to see if you're going to accept my offer. So I always put a time. And what do you guys think about the closing date? Today's the 8th. How many days do you think we should give?
I would say sometime in August for sure, because it doesn't say anything about like appraisal and that stuff, but I'm assuming we're doing all those contingencies. But giving them enough time to be able to do that and fix things if things needed to be fixed, and then also be able to give their landlord a 30-day notice. So like end of August, maybe?
Okay, so you're thinking that's probably about 50 days or so.
Yeah.
45, 50 days. Okay. Any other thoughts?
I'll say the first week of August.
Okay. So you're going for like a quick 30 days?
Yeah.
Okay. Here's my thoughts on this one because it's an FHA loan. FHA underwriting is a little bit different with the banks. Once they approve the file, they then have to send the entire file packet to the FHA to then approve. That turnaround time from the FHA's approval is anywhere between like 10 days and 2 weeks. It's the federal government, guys. They don't really work that fast, okay? Now your lender, they can probably do their in-house approval pretty quickly. I think at that, when you're working with FHA loans, I think in general, a good conversation to have with that lender before you start writing offers is how many days do you need to close? Because the last thing we want to do is put 30 days on here and then have to extend it 2 weeks because we don't have final loan commitment. Conventional offers, 25, 30 days, probably easy for most lenders. FHA, I'm just warning you, there could be an extra 2 weeks in there. I think the process has probably sped up over the years, and still there's like an extra approval step with FHA loans that you should really be aware of. So always a good conversation to have with the lender, and really for any loan type, all the buyers. First thing you should do is have a conversation with the lender before you start showing them properties. Is to find out how many days they're going to need to close the loan. And that'll kind of help you gauge when you're writing offers, you know, how much time do the sellers need? How quickly can the lender close? How quickly can my buyers move? Okay, great. We can do this in 3 weeks because maybe we don't have a home inspection contingency. Or, hey, we are going to need 50 days because the lender says this FHA loan is going to take a while to push through. And I want to make sure that, you know, we're in a situation where we do get loan commitment, you know, without having to extend dates and deadlines. So I would just always recommend you talk to the lender about those scenarios before you start showing houses. So I'll just split the difference. Let's say the 15th. Earnest money. How much earnest money do you think we should put down?
$5,000?
Yeah. Sorry, I'm trying to do some math on my phone. Yeah, 5,000. See if they're comfortable with that. My conversation with buyers, particularly first-time home buyers, is that check gets deposited right away. I have found a lot of first-time home buyers who, you know, these earnest money checks bounce, or they weren't prepared to actually give $5,000 once the offer was accepted. So I think when you're doing your buyer consultations, it'd be really great for you to bring up a point about earnest money and the fact that it's pulled out of their bank that day. So they need to make sure that that's liquid cash, okay? Something fluid. I always default to 3 days. My personal feeling is that with the use of trust funds now electronically in the MLS, People can get their earnest money sent in hours. So, and then earnest money shall be held by, traditionally it's the listing firm, unless the MLS says otherwise. So the property condition report. So there is one. Let's bring that up. So it's pretty recent, June 16th. It's, probably not really anything's changed in the house in the last like 3 or 4 weeks. I always look at the date just to make sure it is somewhere within the last couple of months. Because, things happen. If it is a requirement that if there are any defects that are discovered or happen after this real estate condition report is filled out, there is an amendment to the real estate condition report, or the sellers can just fill out a new one, but either way. So here's that garage issue. The seller simply says, cracks in the garage floor. Here's what I know. There's a line in the offer to purchase. Let me grab it for you. Under the home inspection. Right here, line 210. For the purposes of this contingency, defects do not include structural, mechanical, or other conditions, the nature and extent of which the buyer had actual knowledge or written notice before signing this offer. Okay. So we were told there were cracks in the garage floor. We were told that the garage could add value if there was some TLC provided. Do either of those statements give us the nature or the cause of those cracks in the floor? Does saying there's a crack in the floor tell us the nature or how those cracks in the floor came to be?
No.
Okay. Do saying there's cracks in the floor tell us the extent of the damage of those cracks?
No.
Okay. So I can make an argument in front of a judge that I do not have any knowledge as to what's causing those cracks, how bad the cracks are, whether the cracks are affecting the foundation, whether the cracks can even be fixed. So thereby, I can state that I don't actually have knowledge of that defect. Now, it has been disclosed that there's cracks. But since I don't actually know the nature and extent, cracks in the garage floor would still allow me to ask for repairs after a home inspection. This is where a lot of agents get tripped up, because some listing agents will tell you, well, you knew there were cracks in the floor. You can't ask us to fix those cracks. And I could say, well, I didn't know the extent of them when I wrote the offer. So yes, I can ask for you to fix them. I think there's a couple of ways to have best practices here. Best practices as a listing agent is to just go ahead and get a quote. Go ahead before you stick it on MLS, drag an inspector out there, drag a garage, company out there, have them evaluate the cracks and determine what the extent is of it and what it will actually cost to fix. Then if you stuck that quote and that printout into MLS, now you are sharing the nature and the extent of that defect. And so if the buyer does not ask for it to be fixed at the time that they write the offer, you cannot use that defect in the purposes of the inspection contingency. Did I lose anybody? Does that make sense?
Can you repeat that one more time? Sorry.
No, it's the offer to purchase states in the inspection contingency that if we already knew how bad the defect was, we would not have a case to ask for repairs after the home inspection was done. So in this instance, we know the garage needs some issues with the foundation in the garage. And then the home inspector goes out there and goes, hey, there's cracks in the garage foundation. You should get them fixed. If I know the cause of those cracks and the detail around what it would take to fix those cracks before I wrote the offer, it's no longer considered a defect for the purposes of the inspection contingency. So if I do have something like a quote on MLS where it says it's going to cost $20,000 to fix this garage because here's everything that we're going to have to do, I would have that knowledge before I wrote the offer. And I could address it when I wrote the offer versus trying to address it after I get an inspection contingency. Because if I do have that quote and I don't address it, I cannot call it a defect after the inspection. For the purposes of this contingency, defects do not include conditions to which you've had knowledge of the nature and the extent of that defect.
One more question with that.
Yep.
If you went through and like looked at the house with your buyers and was told by like word of mouth from the seller's agent, like what those cracks are from and everything, does that kind of count as you having the knowledge still, or does it have to be in writing?
I would say, like, this is where, you know, at the end of the day, whether or not it's a defect, the only person that could decide that would be the judge, right? But to me, the seller or the listing agent is not an expert. Now, unless that seller actually was a foundation engineer of some sort, right? But I would still claim that we don't really know the extent. Now they might say, yeah, sure, the garage floor, you know, there was an earthquake and it buckled. Okay, great. I still don't know the extent of that damage. Does it run up the walls? Has it shifted completely off and now I have to try to get a forklift to move it back over? Is it so far in disrepair that now I need to demo it? I think there's just too many variables, and something like word of mouth probably doesn't really cover all those variables, right? I think best practice as a listing agent is to just get it looked at and stick it on the MLS. As a buyer's agent, I think best practice is to be very clear when you write your offer that you don't necessarily, if you want just a general home inspection, fine, but you can go ahead and write in that you want an inspector to come in and check out the foundation and garage, and you can strike these two lines of the offer. You can just strike out lines 210 and 211. So even if I do know about it ahead of time, I can still get to call it a defect because I took out that language.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I see a lot of newer agents sometimes when they come across these defects like this, they get themselves into a position where after that home inspection, the seller says, well, I'm not doing that work. I already told you about it. So strike these lines out. I know some agents that strike it out of every offer they write. I do it more so if I'm in the scenario that I'm showing you right now, where I kind of sort of have a defect knowledge. And then I did go on the showing my buyer, and maybe I looked at and I was like, this is a little bit more than just some TLC. Like these are like, 4 inches deep, and I can see the soil, then I would make sure I struck these out and maybe wrote something in additional provisions. Now, my buyer's offer going to get accepted if I do that? Doesn't help it, right? And that's what you got to balance. You got to balance getting the offer accepted versus protecting your client in their largest financial asset. And I would have a very serious conversation with my buyer if I was writing on this house that said something like, that garage is going to cost you money. Whether it's today with the offer or whether it's, 15 years down the road when you decide you do want to fix it. It's going to cost you some money. Are you willing to take that on? And if their answer is no, well, then I would be striking these lines and telling the sellers to fix the garage and the offer. And just my buyers will have to be okay with not winning it. It's their risk that they're taking, right? So they have to be completely comfortable in that risk. They have to be completely comfortable with either not winning the offer because they don't want to have to deal with this garage, or they have to be comfortable with just getting the offer accepted and deal with the garage on their own terms, whatever that entails. So which risk do they want to take is what you have to find out. All right. Where are we at? Condition report that led us into inspections. Now, in this scenario, if they're like, well, we don't need a whole home inspection because we probably know the electrical and plumbing needs to be done anyways, and we're fine with that, but we still just want somebody to come take care of that or look at that garage, you can waive the inspection contingency and you can still add in a contingency for, well, I would add in this inspection contingency. That's what I would do. This second section here, lines 197, you can say a qualified independent inspector is coming to perform an inspection of the garage, foundation, and structural integrity, something like that. Basically, that already pre-authorizes you to bring out a specific inspector just for that garage without having to wait for the home inspector to come out and like do it later, right? You could also, if you feel like you don't need a general home inspection, you really just want to focus on the garage, you can write something in additional provisions that kind of waives lines 194 here with like a full home inspection. You kind of clarify that out in additional provisions. I think that would probably be the best place to do that. Timeline for home inspections. How long do you want to give?
Two weeks.
Yeah. It does default to 15 days, 2 weeks. I think that's forever in real estate. I think it does depend on how many follow-up inspections you think there might need to be. Now, because we're already saying like up front that we're going to have the garage inspected, we can have that inspector out on the second day after it's accepted, right? But if we wait till the home inspection and then we get that report and then we do follow-up inspectors, we start kind of delaying the amount of time it's going to take to get through this contingency. So it's a little bit of a balance on this. For me, if you're doing just a straight, thorough home inspection, it's a nice house, you know, you walk through it, it's clean, you know, all the light switches are working when you walk through, it seems pretty straightforward, cut and dry, I would say like 7 days. If you think there's going to be some follow-up inspections, then yeah, I would go for the 10 to 15 days. But know that that can also be a little bit of a negotiating tactic when you are writing in inspection contingencies. I had somebody write 3 days once on one of my listings, and they're like, oh yeah, no, our home inspector is going to be out there tomorrow as soon as it's signed. And they're like, okay, great, let's get it done. You know. Shall or shall not have the right to cure? What do you guys think? What do you like to do?
Shall.
Yeah, shall have the right to cure. I think that's better.
Yeah. Shall will definitely win you the offers versus shall not. The thing, if you do shall not, the buyer can kill the deal. Okay, so essentially shall not leaves the buyer to have termination rights versus shall, the termination rights kind of rely on the seller. Okay, so when I'm a listing agent and I'm looking at the two, I always want my seller to have the final say, which would be shall. Because if shall not happens, all the buyer has to do is send a notice and immediately the offer is null and void. And the seller doesn't get to go, oh, wait, no, I'll do this. Make sense? So seller shall have the right to cure. The buyer is kind of giving the seller an opportunity to step up and get the work done. But the seller then has the final say on whether or not they do want to cure those defects. But there's one piece of the right to cure that I would highly recommend you address if you have an inspection contingency in your offer, and that is line number 220 here. That if the seller has the right to cure, they are allowed to do so in a good and workmanlike manner. Can somebody explain to me what a good and workmanlike manner is?
Work done by a certified licensed professional.
Actually, no. That
Okay.
means that the seller can go to Menards and buy what they think they need, and they can do the repair, and I guess as long as it's the pipe's not dripping when they're done, then I guess we could say they did it in a good manner. That terrifies me. Now, most sellers that I know do not want to just be easiest to hire somebody, right? So they do. But there are going to be sellers out there that are like, oh, I can fix that. That's easy to fix. And for the sake of your E&O insurance and for the sake of being pulled into lawsuits, as a listing agent, I would really, really get a licensed contractor out there to do the work instead. And I'd be having that conversation with your seller when you go to listing appointments. That, when we get offers in, if they have home inspections, if there's repairs that need to be made, we'll hire contractors to come and do the work. As a buyer's agent, what you can do is you can write a sentence in additional provisions that just simply says, I'll write it out for you so you can screenshot it. In regards to the right to cure, seller shall cure using licensed and insured professionals. Provided No later than 3 days. So in regards to the right to cure, the seller shall cure using licensed and insured professionals. Paid receipts and lien waivers shall be provided no later than 3 days prior to closing. Then that takes that whole like good and workmanlike manner off the table. If you're writing an amendment after a home inspection where like you're asking for repairs to be done, this is the same language you would put into an amendment. Any questions on that? All right, so radon. Do we need a radon in contingency? I've only ever had one buyer adamant about adding in a radon contingency, and he was a cancer survivor. So I would just explain that to the listing agent, and she was like, "Oh, that's fine." They were cool. Everything worked out. I have had first-time home buyers who, you know, they start by saying, "I want all the contingencies. Yes, I want a radon test." And I'm like, "Okay." And then our offers don't get accepted. And then by offer number 3, they start going, "Well, maybe we pull out the radon contingency." That would be a good, that'd be wise to pull that out. So I would just, you know, if people ask, your buyers ask you, should we add one in? I would say most of the buyers I've worked with don't test for radon. You don't actually have to test for radon in order to install a system. So if you were concerned about radon, you could just have a radon mitigation system installed in the home at any point in time, and they're between like $800 and $2,100 or something. Just say like $2,000. So it's usually my spiel of, you can just install a system. Whether or not the radon's even high in the house, you can just install one if that makes you feel better. All right, financing. So we do have a loan. It is an FHA. When we talked about closing, you know, we want to give a few days from loan commitment to closing. We don't want to put them on the same day. So if we chose August 15th as our closing date, we could say August 7th or August 8th as our loan commitment day. So you actually have to count the days. So we're just going to say 30 days here. Again, an FHA loan, we usually write in about 40 days. So this, again, is a conversation I'm having with the lender to see if they can do an FHA loan in 30 days. If they're like, yeah, we do it all the time, great, go for it. If they're like, nope, has to be 40 days, you're going to have to put in 40 days there, and you're going to have to put your closing date in accordance to that schedule. Okay. So I kind of hate that the closing date's on the first page and then like financing's on page 6, but like you almost got to figure out your financing timeline before you can determine when you can close. Okay, so I said my interest rate was 6.835. If I'm putting 3.5% down, how much is my loan amount on line 251? Do you guys have a mortgage calculator downloaded on your phone?
Yes.
If not, you should. I'm a fan of Carl's mortgage calculator. He's pretty easy to use. All right, so I'm showing in my mortgage calculator that if I'm putting 3.5% down, my loan amount is $318,450. This is based on that $330 purchase price. 99% of your loans are going to be 30-year loans. Okay. If it's not a 30-year loan, it's probably says it somewhere on that pre-approval letter. So just check that. But I would just assume it's a 30-year loan. And then your principal and interest payments. So at 330 purchase price with this interest rate, our principal and interest is $2083.49. Please be very specific down to the cents on what you put in there. Okay. So a lot of times I'm asked, why do we have to fill out this whole financing contingency and like we have to do the math and everything like that? This is your buyer's out. If for some reason that interest rate, after they get an accepted offer, because interest rates are so volatile, right? They're constantly changing. If for some reason that interest rate jumps up to 7.5% overnight, all of a sudden their monthly principal and interest payments jump up to $2,226.65. That's $150 more than they currently are. Your buyer can say no thank you to this loan and get out on the financing contingency. Because this contingency is only satisfied if the buyer qualifies for the loan that was described. Now, I described an interest rate of 6.835 with payments right over $2,000, and now all of a sudden their interest rate 7.5 with $2,200 payments. That's not what I described. So it's only satisfied if the buyer qualifies for the loan described or another loan acceptable to buyer. So the buyer can say, this is not acceptable. And it's also only satisfied if we deliver that loan commitment letter to the listings or to the seller. So your buyer does not have to accept a loan for something that they are not comfortable with. Does that make sense, guys? They don't have to buy this house if all of a sudden they no longer qualify for 3.5% down and the lender's saying you have to put 5. Well, I don't have the cash to do 5. Therefore, I can't qualify for the loan as written, which means I don't have a loan commitment, which means I can get out on the financing contingency. So take this financing contingency and the numbers that you're putting in there, really work in doing the math and take time with it and make sure those numbers are correct. Do it twice, because that is how your buyer can get out of the offer if for some reason those terms of that loan change drastically and they're no longer comfortable with those payments. Okay. Because we're financing with FHA, there's definitely going to be an appraisal. I usually make the appraisal and the financing dates match, just to make it easy. Sellers shall have the right to cure. Note that with appraisal contingencies, the right to cure is only based upon the price. It's not based upon any repairs. So those are going to have to be negotiated. And there is no rule book as to who does the repairs. So I've definitely had buyers do repairs on the house before it closed. Okay, work it out, get it done. I've done repairs on a house. I've installed carbon monoxide detectors just to get the appraisal done. So, are there any other things that you would add into this offer to make it more attractive to the sellers to win your offer? Anything else you'd add in here?
An escalation clause?
Okay, yeah. We can definitely add an escalation clause. It would definitely be more about the buyer's comfort level on that purchase price and the payment. So maybe that's a good way to address the the 315 is the payment you want to be at, but 330 is probably going to win it. Maybe that's the escalation clause we do. They can go up to 350. So if they're comfortable escalating up to 340 or 350, that's definitely a conversation to have with them. Would you guys put the inspection gap in there where you say like we're not going to ask for repairs under X amount?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I'd be careful with that, especially in the scenario that we have about the foundation in the garage, right? Because that's kind of an unknown on how much that's going to cost. But I definitely would maybe do something small, like 2,000 or so. I wouldn't go very high. I wouldn't say like 10, because that's probably a guarantee that the seller's not going to do anything with that garage. Again, it's the risk, and are the buyers okay with taking that risk? Appraisal gap, I probably wouldn't. You would have to talk to the lender. Being first-time home buyers, really concerned about their monthly payments, only 3.5% down. I would go out on a limb and say they don't have that cash. And also know that with appraisal gaps, if it did get enacted and the buyer had to bring extra cash to the table, that could actually affect their financing, and they might not actually be able to be approved for their loan. So before you ever write an appraisal gap into your offer, have a conversation with the lender. And that's just, hey, do they have any extra money for appraisal gaps? Because they might say, well, if you take $3,000 for the appraisal gap, it completely messes with their debt to income ratio, and or that messes with the cash need to close, and now I can't approve them for X amount. So be very careful about appraisal gaps when you're dealing specifically with first-time home buyers, FHA loans, and people that maybe have smaller down payments. If it's too tight of a window, it could kill the deal, actually. So. All right, well, I'm long-winded, so we went over time a little bit, but if you have any questions, any follow-up questions, throw them in Pumble. We could talk about them as a group. I appreciate our discussion today, so thank you. Next week is Accelerator, so no offer practice next week, but then we'll do one the following week, okay?
Thank you.